Welcome everyone to the YNGB Viticulture webinar. This evening's session is Vineyard floor management. A bit of housekeeping. When you signed up, there is a disclaimer to say basically that anything that's mentioned, if you want to take some of the advice, ideas away to your vineyard, it's all done at your own risk. The session is being recorded, so any questions, everything basically will be available for others to view at some point later on. There is a chat window where you can say hi to your friends or whatever, but there's also a Q&A section, which is where it's better to post the questions so that we don't miss anything out. I've also been asked to mention that the Green Book should be winging its way to members. It will be a digital format again this year. So I'll introduce tonight's panelists. We have Dr. Duncan Westbury from the University of Worcester, and he has over 25 years experience of restoring and creating wildflower habitats in a range of situations, including arable and fruit crops. And his research has focused on the use of wildflower areas to underpin fruit production by boosting ecosystems. Welcome, Duncan. Thank you very much for joining us. After that, we have Luke Spalding, vineyard manager at Everflight in just down the road from me, actually, in Ditchling in Sussex. And Luke also does a lot of the work on the YNGB yield survey as well. And last but not least, we have Sam Barnes of SJ Barnes Limited, and of course, one of our patrons, NP Seymour, and Biddenden Vineyard, of course, family vineyard over in Kent. So I think I've covered all the housekeeping bits, introductions, so we may as well get going with Duncan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, Matt, for the introduction, but also thank you for the invitation to talk to you all this evening about wildflower actions for UK vineyards and really what growers can be doing and why they should actually be utilising biodiversity. So the good news is that the demand for UK wine is expected to rise. And as we can see here, that the area under grape production has steadily increased over the years. So based on the 2018 production values, 5.9 million bottles of UK wine were produced from just under 3,000 hectares. But by 2040, we're expecting about 40 million bottles to be produced. So clearly, we're going to need a lot more land under production for grapes. So we are clearly at this time where it's a pivotal time for getting the environmental sustainability of grape production right in the UK. And this is what I want to do. I want to help the industry go forward to make sure that production is maximised, but utilising biodiversity to help achieve this. So here we have a typical image of an alleyway in a vineyard, and the vegetation in this alleyway consisting of only a few species. So this is what we would call a species poor habitat, and associated with that is a low biodiversity. Now, because we've got this low plant species richness here, we are affecting the soil which is lying underneath. And so the soil health would also be classed as being of poor quality. And also the potential for this to store carbon in the soil is also low. So what I want to see more of is this approach where we put wildflower habitat into vineyards. And so by doing this, we are providing a habitat for beneficial species. And key to production of grapes will be boosting natural enemies in those vineyards. Now, by providing that habitat for beneficial species, we're also going to boost other biodiversity as well. So there will be other benefits for species like these pollinators here as well. But it's not just about boosting what's above ground. We also want to boost what's below ground as well. And by having this diverse flora in our alleyways, we can also enhance the health of the soil which lies underneath, and also increase the capacity for carbon to be stored in this system. So typically in many Mediterranean countries, they are keeping the alleyways free of vegetation. Now, clearly, this isn't good for conserving soil and building good quality soil. And so in the UK, it is more typical to see grass cover in these alleyways. But I just want you to compare the root structures, the soil structure, when we have just a few more species in that situation. So you can see we've got different root morphologies, etc. And this is all contributing to a better soil health. And what we can do by diversifying these alleyways is increase the potential to capture carbon from the atmosphere and store it in our soils. We can also improve the water storage of those soils and also the infiltration following any rainfall. And also we can increase the biodiversity of that soil and also the ecological function. A key aspect of that is boosting the abundance and diversity of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So that symbiosis between those fungi and the grapevines is really important. And what we do know from this particular review is that you can boost the mycorrhizal fungi by providing this herbaceous plant cover in the alleyways. But the more diverse that vegetation is, the greater the diversity of mycorrhizal fungi, and therefore the greater the benefits. So this can give the vines better access to soil nutrients, and it can also increase their tolerance to abiotic stress, for example, water stress. So this is a really important approach going forward. So what are the outcomes then which we would expect by diversifying the alleyways? Well, increased biodiversity. So we're in a biodiversity emergency at the moment, so that's got to be a good thing. But we're also going to be increasing soil health, increasing the diversity of those mycorrhizae fungi. So by boosting our natural enemies, we would hope to enhance pest regulation, and therefore we would have a reduced incidence of pests, but also because of those mycorrhizal fungi, a reduced incidence of disease as well. So greater crop resilience. And for growers, well, hopefully this would then mean that we have a reduced reliance on the use of plant protection products, and therefore increased productivity is all part and parcel of this. But ultimately, what would be really great is taking the industry forward in the UK with enhanced sustainability credentials. So I've done a lot of research in fruit crop wildflower areas. So taking that principle of putting habitat into these modern commercial systems, and we've done this in apples, we've done this in cherries. We were the first to put wildflower strips into sweet cherry orchards and also into polytunnel systems. And we've also done this in citrus in Spain as well. So here are some of those images of those different habitats which we've created. Now, it's the cherry story that I want to dwell on just a little bit more. So we wanted to compare what growers were doing as a standard procedure with a standard alleyway. So cutting regularly, sort of every 2 or 3 weeks. And we compared this to a standard wildflower strip, which was left uncut throughout the year. Now, this raised concerns with growers that we were going to have this tall vegetation, up to 1 meter tall in these alleyways. For a start, it could impede the movement of workers during the harvest period, but also that extra biomass in the system could be increasing humidity and therefore the incidence of fungal disease. So I came up with this very novel approach to wildflower management, and this is known as an actively managed wildflower strip. And for this, the growers had to keep their wildflower strips cut to a height of 20 centimeters throughout the year. So straight away, you're probably thinking we're putting in these wildflowers and then we're getting the growers to cut them on a regular basis. Well, even though they were doing this, we got those plant species to flower, but just shorter in the vegetation. And so this chart here is showing basically the number of floral units in these different treatments. So here we have the controlled, so the standard business as usual that growers were doing. and then compared to our 2 wildflower strip treatments. And so the first one is our actively managed wildflower strip treatment, and that wildflower strip that we allow to grow taller. Yes, we are getting more where we allow it to grow taller, but not significantly more. And that's why they've both got these 2 A's on there to show that. So we are enhancing the habitat in this sweet cherry orchard. So what about the natural enemies? If we're wanting to boost pest regulation, are we increasing the natural enemies? Well, in those wildflower strips, we can see here that we are increasing the abundance of natural enemies in the actual alleyways. Now, of course, all the pests are in the cherry trees. So what about that? What are those natural enemies doing in the actual cherry trees? Well, we were hoping that we would get movement of our natural enemies from those strips into the trees. And that's exactly what we found. And we had a significant increase in natural enemy abundance in the cherry trees adjacent to wildflower strips. So there's clearly a benefit. So we got the natural enemies into the cherry trees. Are they doing what we want in terms of pest regulation? So to do this, we used baited cards. So we stuck aphids onto these baited cards and looked at depletion over a period of time. And so we then plotted that in June and in July to see, is there a difference in the number of aphids being taken depending on those treatments? And once again, we are getting higher rates of depletion where we have our wildflower strips. And there's no significant difference between whether or not growers were cutting the wildflower strips regularly or leaving them to grow tall. In fact, there's a slight tendency for there to be greater depletion, so greater pest regulation, when we have our actively managed wildflower strip. So really good news. So given my experience and use of wildflower strips in a variety of different fruit crops, Natural England have asked me to consider what we could do for the fruit sector going forward as part of the new environmental land management scheme. And so that's what I've been working on recently. And part of that is that sustainable farming incentive. And so this is where growers will actually be paid to do management on their land to make their production systems more environmentally sustainable. But as I've already mentioned, there's potentially lots of benefits of growers doing this anyway, but in this way, you are getting paid to do it as part of this scheme. And so I am coming up with these very bespoke fruit crop wildflower areas for the fruit sector. And so I'm compiling the grower guidance as over the next few weeks. And this will include all types of fruit which is grown in England. So stone fruit, ripe fruit to soft fruit. And importantly, it's including grapes. So that's why I've been invited this evening to talk to you. So these fruit crop wildflower areas, there's going to be 2 parts of it. So growers can put them in between the rows of fruit crops, or they can be done at the headlands where space allows. So in terms of what to sow, there's going to be 2 approaches. So there's going to be sort of like this cheap and cheerful mix, which will only last about 3 to 4 years before these agricultural varieties of legumes start fizzling out. And so you start getting just grasses in your alleyways. And so it can be enhanced in terms of the longevity of this strip by putting in some wild types of these different legumes or other species. But this is the sort of boom and bust wildflower approach. There is this other alternative, which, yes, it does cost more, but this would be a 5 to 10 year mix, avoiding those agricultural varieties of legumes. And so growers will be required to select a mix which contains at least 10 wildflower species, providing a range of types, colors, and also flowering times. So for any parcel of land which is going to be put into one of these options, a minimum wildflower area of 10% is required. And so in terms of when you would actually go about doing this, they can be sown in the spring, so March, April. Now is a perfect time to be sowing your wildflower areas, or in late summer, so August to October. Now you need to produce a stale seed bed, and that can be achieved in a number of ways, including the use of glyphosate. But the key thing here is in seedbed preparation, making sure it's firm, you've got a fine tilth on it, and it's also level, so part of that fine tilth. And that will ensure an even germination and establishment of your sown mix. You can broadcast by hand or machinery, or you can shallow drill. But due to the small size of many of the wildflower seeds, you shouldn't be drilling any deeper than 1 centimetre. In terms of management, when sowing perennial seed mixes, this is critical, and a lot of people get this wrong. You need to cut regularly to a height of 5 to 10 centimetres throughout the year, and avoid allowing that sward to get too high before cutting, because you're just going to get a mulch on those seedlings. And then year 2, what I would recommend for in vineyards is to actually use this actively managed wildflower treatment. So actively managing cutting to a height of 20 centimetres throughout the year. You may want to tidy up in early spring and September before the harvest, perhaps to a height of around 8 centimetres, and that would just help any other individuals establish in your wildflower strips. Now, if you've put down that longer term mix, what we still find, even with those longer term mixes, is that they still start to get dominated by grasses. And that's because they are missing many of those natural disturbances, such as grazing by livestock, which provide gaps in the sward for new individuals to establish. And so part of the management that you'll be able to do with this is to go in with a power harrow and actually scarify your wildflower strips to create around 60% soil disturbance. And once again, this can be done in August, September, or in March. This also provides a wonderful opportunity to sow additional species into your alleyways if needed. And here's a couple of pictures here. You might think it's quite strange to be going in with a power harrow to create that disturbance. This is the kind of sward you'll end up with, and this is how it bounces back in that same year. So it's not destroying your wildflower investment. So just to conclude, there's clearly numerous benefits for providing a more diverse flora in the alleyways in vineyards. But those wildflower areas can be established at the headlands if space allows, and between rows of vines. But to get the spillover, the movement of natural enemies into the vines, and to get those essential mycorrhizal associations, I would certainly recommend putting those into the alleyways. And this actively managed wildflower strips, it's not been done elsewhere. We've only ever done it in cherries. No one else is doing this kind of approach. And I believe it could be a game changer for the industry going forward. But we need more research. And this is what I'm really passionate about getting funding for, to actually, put this into practice in a variety of vineyards. Now, if you do intend to look at how you're managing your alleyways and you're interested in wildflower areas, then please send me an email and register your interest. And I will be able to then send you the grower guidance to see how you get on with utilizing that. And then that can be changed accordingly if more information, etc., is needed. The only thing I would ask is that if you do use our grower guidance, is that you then invite us to come and have a look to see how you're actually getting on. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Duncan. That was excellent. I have a couple of questions. I've had some questions that I'll probably leave till the end because I think it could go out to all of the panelists, but there's a couple here. First question is, are the wildflowers organic?
You can buy organically produced wildflowers. They would be charged at a premium, but there are those options out there. I don't think I should be recommending any seed companies but there are some out there which do sell organic seed.
Excellent, thank you. And another question is it easy to find seed mixes that are suitable for the soil type and native species of the vineyard, e.g. chalk grassland?
Yes, definitely so. So in our research, we've tended to use our own formulated mixes, and I'm currently working with one of the seed companies to come up with off-the-shelf mixes of those. There are lots of seed mixes out there. There's some, if you contact me directly, I can let you know some of the seed companies. But yeah, there's seed mixes tailored for soil type, etc. So yes.
Fabulous. And Another question from an anonymous attendee. Will the use of AMWS work in accordance with livestock grazing?
If vineyards in the UK are being grazed, I wasn't aware of that. And I'd have to find out more about when that grazing would actually be done. If it's in the sort of autumn, winter time, yeah, then yes, no problem at all. You can maintain it short during the winter months. It's just during the growing season where you'd need to have it at your 20 centimetres.
Sure thing. And just one final one before we move on to Luke. While the predator numbers build up, surely the aphids will have already caused damage. The lag time is always an issue. I don't know if you have a comment on that. Well,
it all depends on what natural enemies you're talking about. Ladybirds, everyone thinks they're brilliant, but they will only lay their eggs when there's already an outbreak. So it's having that reserve, and this is what these alleyways are doing. They are actually providing alternative prey so that they are already there in the system with the natural enemies feeding on them, which then can move over to the crop. And that's what we found in cherries. Brilliant.
Duncan, thank you so much. We'll move on. Where are we? 6:20. Luke, time for you to reveal yourself. And I think Julia is going to do your presentation. So you'll have to do a sort of COVID type Downing Street briefing. Next slide, please, kind of thing. Away you go, Luke.
All right. Evening, everyone. So I'm going to follow on from Duncan really and just take you on the path we've chosen at Everflight and what we've kind of put into fear. Well, we've basically put theory into practice. And we've started our journey down a regenerative kind of floral management theory. If you can go to the next slide, please. So, just a brief overview. What do I mean by regenerative? Basically, it's minimalising soil disturbance, so no cultivation under vine, especially. No cultivation unless you're establishing a seedbed in the interrows, returning organic matter back into the soil. So that's what we do at Everflight, is we mulch everything and we put it under the rows. We also, throughout the entire year, keep all soil covered. We are quite a wet site, so we try to avoid any soil erosion during the winter. Low inputs, we haven't, this was the first year in 5 to actually put down any fertilizer, and that was an organic fertilizer with high humus and organic matter that we put in. And then we try and maximize basically our cover crop diversity, which we'll get to in a minute. But also maximizing the crop diversity we have found has caused issues, and I'll cover some of those briefly. Next slide, please. So, rotation is key. So the centre photo in this is actually Everflight. This is our diversity cover crop that we established last year. It's on a 3-year rotation, so every other row in the vineyard is basically planted with a wildflower mix. And all of those wildflowers are allowed to grow to a height of 40 to 60 centimetres before they're cut first. They normally basically just around about seeding time we cut, which is just after flowering. And then we side discharge everything under vine to create this green mulch. We've been using, funny enough, Sam supplied me the equipment to do it in 2019. However, we've now moved to a flail mower with a side discharge auger to also manage our prunings. So before we would just collect our prunings and burn them, which is just not good. So we've decided to move to this undervine mulch, including prunings now. So the base is prunings, and then we've got the green mulch from the cover crops and the grass rows. And then, yeah, basically this was our chosen path really to increase biodiversity and help with pollinators in the vineyard and basically increase life. But the main focus was on soil. This whole idea of different root masses, different species growing within the soil and then being converted into kind of like a dead end carbon recycle unit underneath the vine to increase our inputs or our natural inputs without having to use fertilizers. The issue we have found, and I'll get into that in more detail in a minute, is with nitrogen, actually, which is quite funny in this country if you think about it. And it's just the fact that we are actually using so much nitrogen with our grasses, with our cover crops, that we've actually started to see a depletion in vigor within the vines, especially last year in one block, where I actually only needed to trim it once, where other parts of the block were being trimmed 3 times, and that's I believe down to the cover crops that we've been using. So yeah, the diagram is just literally just an overview of how we do it. So you've got the prunings going down first, and then you top it up 2 to 3 times a year with grass cuttings and the cover crop from the interrow. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is Everflight back in 19, sorry. Everflight was established in 2016, was run conventionally. Basically, for the first 2 years, it was herbicided, cultivated, roll hacked. And then in 2018, they decided to plant a cover crop of ryegrass, cocksfoot grass, and phacelia, which was basically a high biomass cover crop decision on every single row it was established. 18, they cropped quite well for a third year vineyard. They did 6 tons across the site. We're only 2.6 hectares at the moment. And basically from that, we left everything as it was in 19. We only did 1 herbicide pass at the beginning of the year, which was a reduction. I think basically we worked it out that in 2019 and 20, we had reduced our herbicide input by 2/3 compared to what we were doing in 16 and 17. And I think 18 was already starting to reduce a little bit, but yeah, it's now massively reduced to what it was. What the picture I think demonstrates here is just what you need to kind of like the biomass you need to establish a green mulch and to suppress the weeds through the year fully. It's extremely important that you get a good amount of nitrogen into the ground throughout, because what we have seen is the biomass has dropped off since it was established these grass interrows. Ryegrass is quite nitrogen heavy in its uptake, but obviously hopefully the idea is that going underneath the vines that it should make these nitrates, these nutrients that are in the dying matter under the vine kind of basically plant ready. And what the 2 mixes are, it's kind of the trials we've done, or I've done as well over the last 3 or 4 years, is kind of where we've kind of got to in our thinking of what's kind of works. And it's a really vigorous high mix of creating a lot of biomass in this grass mix that is used on every other row. And then we have this cover crop mix that we put in on the other row of the vineyard. So basically 50% of it is the cover crop mix. We rotate the cover crop row every 3 to 4 years. So at the moment, we're in a kind of residual part of this cover crop cycle, and we won't rotate it until next year. So it was established, next year, 2023. So it was established in 2020. and the cover crop rows, and then 2021 will be fine, and then 2022 we should hopefully manage to keep it there in place, and then 2023 we will move the rows over and establish, you know, a grass mix if it's needed in the old cover crop rows, and establish a new cover crop where the grass is now. As I say, we've managed to suppress or reduce weeds enough that we haven't needed to do a herbicide during the season or undivine cultivation, massively reducing our fuel usage, tractor usage down the rows. And it's just, I think for us, it seems to have worked. I'm not going to lie, there's been failures. You know, we had a strong storm come in last year, and it blew half my undivine mulch away, and then the weeds came. So it's tricky, and it's not for everyone, but it's definitely a path that we should be looking at more, I feel. Yeah, as I said, the cover crop mixes, they're tricky to get right, and every site is different. These seem to be working now for us, but in 2020, because it was so dry, our biomass was massively reduced, and we didn't get the coverage that you can see in the photo here, which we did in 2019. So we have got pockets of nettles and docks that came through in 2020 that just didn't in 2019. So yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, just to round off, a lot of people come to me with like, how do you make this work for establishment? And basically, I don't think you can. I think for the first year, you have to probably cultivate. You probably have to undivine cultivate, roll hack. But if you don't want to use herbicides, you know, if you're going down the organic biodynamic route or regenerative route, you really do not want to use herbicide at all, then maybe it's something, and you want to go down, you know, a more sustainable route. We have to think about how we plant. And I've talked to a lot of growers in Champagne and Loire, and when they do infills, they plant them with a double post. Which you can see in the two photos. That is because a lot of them do undivine cultivation, either, you know, with a side harrow or a side blade, and to protect the vines, to protect the young vines early on. These two posts basically withstand the hit, and maybe it's something we need to think about going forward with plantings, that we don't just put in a fiberglass rod or a metal post, little metal rod with a tube around it, and we look for something a bit more substantial that can take the hit. I think, especially, you know, looking at the future tech as well, that undivine cultivation is something that we can easily look to basically make it electric. You know, there are a lot of robots out there now. One in the picture especially seems to be making quite big headway, where it's totally autonomous, it's electric, zero fuel. I think it can do a hectare in about 2 hours, undivine cultivation. So, you know, you just program it, GPS it, let it run. You don't need the labor. You can basically control it from your office. And this could be, on especially large sites in this country, could be, you know, a massive saving, and also eco-friendly, while you know, making establishments better in the long run. I think that's, I mean, generally, I think that's really about where I'm at. I think with my theory, my ideas, and where we've gone with at Everflight. So yeah, I'm planting this year another 4 hectares, and I'm still wondering how to do it myself. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, do let me know.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. couple of questions that are probably specific to your presentation. The mulching cuttings leaving in the vineyard, are you concerned about fungal disease spread, maybe ESCA, that kind of thing?
Good question. At the moment, the vineyard is very young. We haven't luckily seen any potential problems with ESCA or trunk disease in the vineyard. Normally, issues with trunk disease start to show their heads 10 years in. We obviously maintain a very good vineyard, hygiene, health. I, for instance, do all the pruning myself at the moment, virtually. This year's been a bit of an issue, but most of the time it's me, and we do have I clean my blade probably 3 or 4 times a day with antibacteria, and when we're moving between varieties, we use new tools. So to answer the question, if there was a serious outbreak with ESCA, we would probably remove those parts manually and burn them off-site, but we would still maintain the mulching for the rest of the site.
Perfect. Thank you. We've had a few more questions, which I think are probably best answered. I think we'll open those up to everyone when we get to the end. Some good questions there. Stephen Skelton has just commented, Harron Hope used double wooden posts immediately after planting, presumably for that reason. I know that is potentially an issue, isn't it? Is having something that's going to protect the vine from a machine cultivating. And I look forward to seeing plenty more robots in UK vineyards in the future. Okay, thanks a lot, Luke. And Mr. Barnes, you're on.
Hi guys, cheers Matt, thank you very much. Hope you're all doing well this evening. Julia's got my slides because I'm technophobe. If I could have my first slide up. So basically what I'm going to talk you through is sort of, exactly what it says on the screen, mechanisation and best practice for alleyway establishment and under vine management. So we did a webinar similar to this last year, but just on the under vine strip. So there's a little bit of that sort of recycled, and I'm sure you can go back onto the WinesGB website and get that presentation back where we had Julian Lecourt, myself, and we talked through, and I think it was Chris Cooper as well, and we talked through different management methods of the under vine strip and how that works depending on whether you're organic, biodynamic, conventional, whatever. If I could have my first slide, please. So going on from what Duncan has said, and also Luke, Duncan highlighted there that one of the key factors of your alleyway establishment is the preparation, and like anything, you're only as good as the preparation that you put in front of you. In my opinion, there's a couple of ways you can get around this. So as you can see, I've got 2 photos there. This is work that we've done in the last 12 months. So one site that we're going to seed within the next 10 days, 2 weeks, is Allbourne on the left. So we've sprayed off every other alleyway. We're going to establish a wildflower and cover mix in this vineyard to encourage soil health, and also get some green manure in there and sort of regenerate the soil a little bit. But so in that scenario, we've weed sprayed every other strip, and by doing this allows us to have access to the vineyard at this sort of key time of year. So there's a lot of practicalities that come into this. It's not, being a wet nation that we are, it's not like in a lot of parts of the world where you can go and cultivate and seed and then irrigate afterwards. We generally are too wet and then have to worry about it, or don't have to worry about it drying up. So by leaving every other alleyway established, it means that we can get sprays on, we can do our frost protection, we can do all those kinds of things. Obviously seeding in the spring is great because it allows good germination. Your soils are warming up, you've got the moisture in the soil already, so there's a lot of factors. And also it gives it a nice chance. As long as it takes well in the spring, you'll get a really good establishment. Whereas sometimes drilling in the autumn, you can get a bad take if it becomes too wet and the soils cool down too much. So spring establishment's really good. The other picture is of a shallow cultivator that we use. And this basically, we ran this through this site twice after planting last year. So that was all of the weed management we did in that site for the whole of 2020. So after planting, we shallow cultivated once with a roll hack, and then we shallow cultivated again just prior to seeding that site, and that was enough to keep the weeds at bay. Obviously, preparation is key. So if I could have the next slide, please. So here you've got a site which was planted and then left for 12 months, and then we went in and weed sprayed this, and then here you can see that we've ripped the rows prior to planting. So you see the before and the after, the glyphosate sprayed row against the ripped row, and this is really key because you're as Duncan explained, you do need good tilth. You need a good amount of seed and soil contact. Obviously, depending on what you're sowing will depend on what depths. You know, for the wildflowers that Duncan was talking about, you want to be nice and shallow. But for other things, you know, you see on the continent, a lot of people are growing lots of legumes like beans and peas and things like that on more established vineyards, and then you need more depth. So you need control over that. And the way that you can do that is with tilth. And you need seed and soil contact. So by getting in there and opening up the soil, and it will allow you to do that. And obviously by spraying it off first, you're allowing yourself as little competition as possible. So if I could have my next slide, please. It's a bit rough and ready. It's a lot more pictures than words, my my presentation. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to stick them in the comments and Q&A, and I'll happily go through any bits that anyone wants to talk about again. So here you've got two sites that we've drilled. So this is a drill which I custom built alongside MPC Moors. So I sourced all the parts and everything and made 1.5 meter wide combination drill. So that's a power harrow followed by double disc coulters with a seeder. So we're actually drilling the seed into a slot, and behind every coulter there is a press wheel. And with this, I'm able to drill at depths from nothing down to sort of 3, 4, 5 centimeters. So, you know, depending on what you're sowing, we can have complete control over that seed placement, which you just don't get with a broadcaster. Obviously, certain things like clover, I mean, you could throw clover on tarmac and it will grow. But there is seeds within a lot of those mixes that do need good seed soil contact, and by pressing them into the soil, you're reducing the risk of birds and pests and all of those things getting at your seeds. And obviously, as we saw from Duncan's presentation, the seeds are not cheap, depending on what you plant. So you want as good an establishment as possible. If I could have my next slide, please. So here you've got one that's just been drilled and then one that's 6 months later. So this is just a grass mix on the right, but it gives you an idea. This kind of leads on to my later part of the presentation where I talk about undervine management techniques and different tools. By drilling rather than broadcasting or using a fertilizer spreader or whatever other methods that you've got, you're establishing a solid runway. What I wouldn't want to see personally in my management is to give myself more problems by broadcasting seeds in my undervine strip, which then you're going to have to try and kill off in one way or another. So you're creating yourself a problem by broadcasting seeds. So if you can drill them in nice, neat alleyways, you're doing 50% of the work to benefit yourself prior to having to worry about them for the rest of the season. And I think that you know, that's a massive benefit. You're just making your job easier, in theory. If I could have my next slide, please. So here you've so a little bit away from what Duncan said with his wildflowers. You've got here is a mustard and radish crop that I drilled at our home vineyard. So at Vineyards back in 2018. So the first picture with the radish on the left is about 2.5 months after I planted this. and it took hold rather well, probably a little too well, and gave me a little bit too much competition. And as you can see in the second picture on the right, so yeah, we built lots of organic matter and we mulched this down and mulched it down and mulched it down, but I probably drilled it a bit too close, hence my previous slide. And the comments made there, but so it probably gave us a little bit too much competition, but we got a lot of organic matter and we were turning that over, and that got the worms working and the transfer of nutrients from the center of the alleyway. I mean, our alleyways at Bindon are quite wide, which is another thing that I would also add to your alleyway and vineyard management, is having wide alleyways is useful. Especially if you're biodynamic organic, because a lot of the tools that you need space to use them. So things like the mower that Luke mentioned, you know, I was speaking with a customer the other day, and there's limitations on those tools because of the sizes of the rows. So a 2 meter alleyway is quite hard to find the correct equipment and utilize it, especially if you're trying to manage your undervine and the alleyway in a sort of sustainable or eco-friendly way. So if you want to cultivate undervine but mow and mulch in the alleyway, say you want a flail mower. Well, a flail mower has 20 centimeters of of drive on the side, so that means you have 20 centimeters more to manage undervine potentially, because you can't drive flush up to a post with everything unless you're an absolute whiz in a tractor, which I've seen plenty of posts that have been knocked about, and you know, we're all guilty of that. But you know, so you've got to make it fit, and so when you're planning to plant, I would say that you should be looking potentially at slightly wider rows if you're going down a biodynamic route, and give yourself space to manage that. Could I have my next slide, please? So after that, so going on from the previous slide, you can look at rollers and crimpers. So rather than mowing down, and this is not so much the wildflowers that Duncan spoke about, and more about cover crops, it is about getting that transfer of green matter and green manure into the soil, and getting the worms working and moving all of that organic matter. So rather than mowing it and pulverizing it into oblivion and losing all the moisture and all of those things, is something that we've got a machine over in the UK with MPC mowers this year. So Clemens Eco Roll. So if anyone would like to have a look at one, you're more than welcome to come to the yard and see it. Obviously COVID friendly. And what this allows you to do is actually to just crimp and break up the stems without completely destroying the structure, but also it allows you to get into the row and manage it as a conventional row without completely disrupting everything. So I think it's a really good point. It's been used in arable and sort of standard crops for quite a long time now, and we're seeing more and more of it on the continent. Hence why we've brought one into our stock at MPC mowers for this coming season. If I could have my next slide, just going to briefly, really quickly, because I'm a bit conscious of time, run through some alternative methods and some different methods for management of the undervine strip. So really quickly, if I could have my next slide. So we've got herbicide sprayers, obviously, you know, green books out as we mentioned earlier, so you can check all of the legislation on what's available for this coming season. But it's still a really quick, fast, cost-effective way of managing your undervine strip with good results that are relatively long-lasting with the chemicals that we've got available. Obviously, this doesn't really work for organics unless you're using acids, but obviously they're extortionately expensive, and I don't actually know anyone that's ever really used them. If I could have my next slide. You've then got cultivation. So in young vines, you know, reducing competition, I think, is highly important, and to ensure you get as best establishment as possible. So take as much competition away as you can, and cultivation is a way of doing that. Along, you know, if you're not wanting to go down the herbicide strip route. Next slide is just a picture of a finished alleyway. So this is an alleyway that we completed last year. So we've mowed and roll hacked this at the same time. You know, benefits of that is you can do two jobs at the same time. It doesn't matter if it's windy, whether it's raining, whether it's too hot, too cold. You know, all of those things, you can just go out and do it. So there's pros and cons to both. If I could have the next slide, please. So here you've got strimmers and bud rubbers. So multi-use tool, if you're in an organic or biodynamic situation where your cover has got away and it's a bit too much to cultivate, then there is tools on the market that can deal with this. Something that we actually mentioned last year with the other panelists was compact tractors. So this is an option potentially for smaller vineyard owners. So there is a potential option to get this on a system with like a donkey engine and a hydraulic power pack, which you could tow behind you. So where a lot of those, if smaller vineyards of a hectare or less that haven't got a full size fruit tractor, then that's probably going to be the most sensible option. But it wouldn't be massively advisable for establishment because you'll have too much competition. Personally, well, that's my opinion, and I would try and steer down the herbicide and cultivation route in the first 2 years at least to help you get as best establishment as possible. Onto my next slide, if that's all right. So here you've got a finger weeder, so gentle tool, which allows you to sort of demound. You can create a bit of mounding with a roll hack, depending on how you use it. And it depends on how much you will get on and off the seat to adjust it as you go across your different soil types. The finger weeder allows you to be a little bit more sort of haphazard with it and not have to worry quite as much about mounding around the graft. That will allow you to take that down. So that's one option. And then my final slide is sort of the Rolls Royce of undervine management, I would say, where you've got a Clemens undervine blade. So this is a Radius SL, so you can have it with just a blade or just a tiller depending on your soil type. So some with a lot of stone, like the photo on the right. I know Harrow and Hope have had one of these for a long time, and they do all of their weed management with it. They obviously wear a bit of metal because it's very stony where they are, but it works very effectively for them. They're on a narrow planting, so they're at 1.8 meters, so it works in that as well. And then you've also got the option for a tiller on that head as well. So it's a bit of a get out of jail free card, going back to what my comment about the strimmers, where if you have a little bit too much growth, the tiller will allow you to kind of incorporate that and mulch that up and deal with that in a slightly better way than a roll hack, for example, which if you've got something that's got too much of a root base, it can tend to sort of roll up like turf. And then it can cause a bit of an issue. But so that's a very quick overview, just quite conscious that we're quite near the end. So I'll invite Matt back to the front and hopefully we can answer some questions for you all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. Thank you to Duncan and Luke as well. I think combining some theory with practice, with experience, with machinery. I think we've covered an awful lot this evening, and I hope everyone's found it really useful. Something that's really struck me is how far we've moved on when we're talking about soil health, soil management, floor management in general as an industry. Even in the last sort of 10 years or so, it's really moved on quite phenomenally. So I think that's excellent. A few questions. I just need to move my questions box out of the way. Luke and Duncan, could you come back on as well? And the first one from Richard: could you sow undervines as an overwinter mix as a green manure, and then follow that by a cultivation in the spring? Probably one for Luke or Duncan.
Right. I think really, it will depend on your mix and what you want, because you've also got to make sure what you're sowing can survive winter and will grow. I would say the latest you really want to be sowing is September, and I'll be honest, I don't think you'll get good enough biomass by April to really make any benefit into cultivation into the soil. I would say you would need to think about doing it for May or June to do the first cultivation into the soil to get the nutrients and the biomass in there. But that's me. And it also, sites are all different. Whatever you put in, you've got to think about your site and what vigor's in the site and the soil. because everything will grow different.
Thank you, Lou. Anything to add there, Duncan? Okay. Next question is just, are there any downsides, things to keep an eye out for, potential pitfalls and so on and so forth? That came in just towards the end of Duncan's presentation, I think.
Well, in terms of pitfalls, what's meant by that? Is it to do with the issues of putting wildflower strips into these alleyways?
I guess no, yes. Any potential problems that could potentially happen. I don't know if there could be a upsetting nutrient availability, possibly putting the wrong stuff in the wrong soil, maybe.
Yeah, in some crops you have to be careful what wildflowers you put in, because they can actually be a host for the pests that you're looking to control. So, for example, in apples and cherries, we don't put certain wildflowers in because they are that sort of secondary host. So I'm not aware of any of those for grapes, but I'm still learning a lot about viticulture. So when we went into citrus, I was on a very steep learning curve, and I'm on the same for grapes, but eager to learn.
Good stuff. And also, while we're on wildflowers, would the research work in Welsh vineyards as well?
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah. And I've been contacted by people in the area around Worcestershire that are interested as well. So yeah, Wales is only just a stone's throw away. So yeah, no problem at all.
Good stuff. Joel has asked if there's a way to sow cover crops with using a no-till method, basically. Does reworking the soil every 3 to 4 years destroy the good that the cover crop does? That could probably be answered by any one of you, I would think.
Machine.
Sorry, Luke, I missed that.
Direct drill, definitely. Getting one that will fit in a vineyard currently is tricky. The right tool, I would say personally, is something that I've looked at a great extent. Me and Cameron at Ref Vinny were having a good yarn over this the other week, and yeah, it can be done, definitely. But I would say that the benefit that you get within the 4 years of your establishment, or 5 years, or up to 10 years, as Duncan said, is, far outweighed. To actually only do that once every decade really isn't, that catastrophic. I mean, you see vineyards that are left after they're planted to, regenerate the plants that are in the soil, but generally it's not what was in the field when they were before they were planted, because you turn them over and you buried them, and you get all manner of different things. Thistles will lie dormant in ploughing for 10, 15, 20 years. So all you do is turn up all the nasties that someone buried a long time ago. I think just best practice, give yourself as good a chance as possible, clean it up and go again at the moment. But also, the one thing that we have to deal with that people don't in wider alleyways and in arable situations is traffic. We're driving over our alleyways all the time. So, a lot of things might not establish that well. So you'll end up with a pair of 11s up the middle of your row, and you'll only have a strip that's maybe 60, 70 centimetres in the middle, which will establish really nicely. Whereas a cherry orchard, you've probably got a little bit more space on either side, planted at 3 metres maybe, or 2.5. Duncan's shaking his head. But or an apple orchard, there's a little bit more room to play with. So, I'd throw that over to Duncan now and see what his thoughts are on that. But practically, I think it's a challenge, definitely.
So yeah, the clearance on the wheels is the key thing. And so in cherries, we sowed a 1 metre wide strip, and then that would be reduced to about 70 centimetres. But in the actual wheelings, you do get things like South Heel, and I noticed that was in one of Luke's mixes. That is a very low grown species. You get that in your lawn because it always escapes the cutter and all that, and it can move out into those more open areas. So it is actually quite a good thing to have those wheelings in, for certain species. So
we are looking at a no-till drill for Everfly. we've been in contact with 1 or 2 manufacturers in the US and Europe. But I will say this: it's not economically sustainable. If you are, and there's a phrase that Greg Dunn at Plumpton and I kind of coined, and if you've got to be in the black to go green. If you do not have the budget, just don't even think about it. There are other options, as Sam has covered, to do it more sustainably, economically sustainable, to do regenerative and maybe more sustainable kind of practices as we're trying to do. It does cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And to add to that, to be sustainable, you have to be a vineyard and exist. So if you haven't got any cash, you're not being sustainable because you're not.
No, exactly. That's what I mean. Economically, yeah.
Very good point. We could probably just squeeze a couple more in. Alex, very quickly, Luke just wants to know how much an electric robot costs.
Economically sustainable. Don't think about it. I think I know 1 or 2 sites that I visited in Champagne had been trying it for the research company, and I think it was close to about 2 tractors worth in value. 10 tractors in value.
So
Tim,
150 grand.
150 grand, basically. About 150 grand.
Tim's asked a question about his vineyards in other countries, particularly in Burgundy. He's seen lots of moss under the vines, probably unintentional. Is that an option? Now, as far as I'm aware, when we're talking about soil health, moss generally isn't a good sign. Duncan, you might have something to add to that.
Well, it's usually indicative of sort of dampish soils. You get a lot of moss in apple orchards as well. But yeah, I wouldn't see it as a beneficial thing.
And probably time for one more. Really good. Oh, is there any species in particular that can contribute to greater mycorrhiza? Yeah,
so most of our native perennial species have mycorrhizal associations. It's the annual species which there's a tendency for them not to, just because they're short-lived, and so evolution has not, benefited those mycorrhizae which are specific to them. So hence why I prefer these native perennial seed mixes, because they can do everything you want them to, really, and boost those mycorrhizae. So yeah, go for any native perennial species.
Okay, and I think we'll do 2 more quick ones. For vineyards of less than a hectare, how do you do the undervine cultivation without machinery? Yeah, good question.
Tricky.
Yeah.
How good your right arm and the hoe in your shed is, probably. No, I mean there is options out there. I know, like Plenk make electric tools with like electric hose that you can use, but how sustainable is that? How many man hours are you wasting? Time's not free, is it? And nor are those tools cheap. So I would think that you could pick yourself up a relatively reasonable tractor and get into a roll hack kind of setup for not ridiculous money. I'm not talking 5 figures. I'm talking 4 figures probably. If you found the right thing and did it all correctly, you could probably. You could do it, but I would say that it's the same as what Luke said. You've got to spend some money. That is long and short of it. We've been blessed with our use of chemicals for the last 50, 60 years post-war, and we've all sat on our laurels with that until about 5, 10 years ago, and now we're all sort of backing up to the trend, aren't we? So I think it's just a change of practices. That's the thing. Everyone went and bought a weed tank. Everyone's going to have to go and buy a different piece of kit now. So
good stuff. We'll do one more, which mentions pest and disease control. I imagine this is in reference to where we're mulching sort of quite cover crops or plants with quite a dense biomass. I imagine we're talking about increased humidity, that kind of thing. Does anyone have any experience of that being a particular issue? I think I'll just add something to that. I think what the work that Duncan's been doing is something that I quite like, is the idea of cutting it regularly, so that we're not creating that sort of environment in the mid alleys. But I don't know if anyone wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Matt, because I think the climate that we're in, we get dews and they dry late in the mornings, towards harvest, and you're potentially giving yourself a harbour for disease there, aren't you? And the fact that you can cut it to, I think that was the one thing that stood out to me from Duncan's. I always thought wildflowers, you've got to leave them, and actually the fact that you can knock their heads off and they'll keep coming back, even down to 8 centimeters at times of year when you need to have access and you're walking around and getting through the vineyard. I think that was really insightful for me. So I think very, very interesting, because access, we've got to be in there all the time, and we are in a maritime climate, so wet in the evenings, wet in the mornings, you get a very short dry spell throughout the day. So the sort of least green matter that you can harbour, I think will be beneficial to the crop that we're trying to produce. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've gone over a few minutes. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I think we've done the majority of them. Thank you, Duncan, Luke, and Sam. That's been brilliant. Really, really useful. And happy Easter, everybody. This will be viewable again, I believe, Julia. And I think the slides are going on to the members area of the WineGB website. And see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Matt, thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.